For the moment, though, let's get more reaction to the violence from political analyst Oliver Dickson, joining me live from Johannesburg. Oliver, thank you very much for your time this evening. I'm sure you've been watching events unfold in the country over the last 2 days. What do you make of the continued looting, violence and unrest, and perhaps the inability of police, as their resources are so stretched, to make any kind of dent on what we're seeing unfolding?
The irony about policing resources having been stretched thin to deal with the crisis at the moment is that it's the United Nations has long told us that South Africa is actually an under-policed country, and the brunt of the under-policing in South Africa is visited mostly upon poor people who have very little access to protection. And so now that we're a country that is 100,000 police officers understaffed in the minimum, it's quite ironic now that the government recognizes the fact that there's limited resources as far as that's concerned, to be able to contain something that should have been so predictable over at least the last 10 to 15 years.
Oliver, some South Africans are calling for the president to institute a state of emergency. Former head of public prosecuting, Vusi Pikoli, is just one of them. What do you think of those calls?
Completely unnecessary, right? A state of emergency allows the president to do two things. One, to enact new legislation that deviates from the Bill of Rights, but with very strict checks and balances. And at each point, should that be passed by a majority sitting of Parliament. In fact, for the president to pass that, Parliament would need to convene, and the president would need to get the approval of Parliament, which makes it a very political case. A very heavy political case for the president to go and make to sell before Parliament for that to happen. And when he passes new legislation, Parliament has to pass that each time with a sitting, right? But more than that, and crucially here, is that the president, as far as deviations is concerned, it cannot deviate to the extent that the president can do extraordinary things that he can't do right now already without a state of emergency. But more than that, is that you can only enact a state of emergency when you have the policing capacity to match the requirements thereof. We don't have the policing and security capacity to match that. If they're already stretched thin, declaring a state of emergency is not going to miraculously give them more military boots and police boots on the ground. So it's just unnecessary. It would be a cosmetic action at best, right? And the irony of that call coming from the Durban Business Chamber, coming from businesses in South Africa, from the business sector, and coming from calls within the president's own circle, is that these people are afraid of investment. If you're going to signal to the rest of the world that we're in a state of emergency, that's making a definitive case for no one to invest in here, because you're in an emergency state. I'm not going to see any returns on these investment. And so the president must prove that he can get a grip on the matter at the moment without having to enact the state of emergency.
Oliver, we saw these protests start obviously over the arrest of former President Jacob Zuma. They then evolved into something entirely different. A lot of analysts have said that in not getting involved and not commenting on the arrest of former President Jacob Zuma, current President Cyril Ramaphosa did exactly the right thing, because it's not a political issue. It is an issue of the judiciary. These are legal issues, legal fights that the former president is having to face in court, and that the current president should not get involved in any way. But as the violence and the unrest has taken a turn and spiraled into something different, we've seen perhaps a delay in the presidency getting involved, making decisive or taking decisive action to prevent or to stop looting and violence and unrest from spreading. Do you think it could possibly be that we're struggling to find our feet in terms of separation of powers, where to get involved and where to stay out of it?
You know, as the commentariat, as the media, and just as ordinary South Africans, we really should gift ourselves with the luxury of complexity and not deny ourselves that, because we're a complex country with a complex issue where any single event is a culmination of a multiplicity of issues, right? And so factional battles play out. Sure, separation of powers conversations play out. Poverty and inequality play out. Incompetence in leaderships play out. All of these things coexist all at the same time in a cocktail of issues, but also coexist alongside each other, and they're very much inextricable. To that extent, we must then say, yeah, sure, people are protesting because of ideological political reasons that may be misfounded and not grounded in reality and fact in defense of Jacob Zuma. Maybe. Definitely. And even there might be splits to say people doing it along factional lines, people doing it along tribal lines, people doing it along geographical lines, because I'm from KZN and I identify with Jacob Zuma as someone who comes from KZN, so I will rise up for him. They can do it along those lines. At the same time, what we could see out is opportunism within the ANC opposing factions of Cyril Ramaphosa, using this to trumpet the idea that he's a weak leader. They may as well be right in that, but they're using this opportunistically to do exactly that. But more than that, it is also just people who see an opportunity to finally run into a Woolies, Checkers, Pick and Pay and a ShopRite to loot the food and to loot the television set or the couches that they've never had, that they've been denied to be able to access by economic disenfranchisement, to be able to do that finally, not for any political reasons in defense of any ANC faction, but just because they choose to do that. Ramaphosa addressed this matter 3 times and fails to quell the unrest in South Africa. That should be an indication to him that there's nothing he can say at this moment that will change the situation. You can't, through 3 speeches, waxing lyrical, filled with platitudes, change the mood and atmosphere of the country when the mood and atmosphere of the country is rooted in deep inequality. Ramaphosa released a statement on Sunday morning, delivered a speech Sunday night, and then delivered another speech on the matter on Monday night, last night. And on all 3 occasions, fails to be able to say exactly the thing that would make someone who's currently looting decide to go home. Many people who loot, if you were listening to a lot of these people on interviews across various media platforms, are saying, look, I had access to 350 Rand as a relief grant just about 6 months ago. Today I don't. I have no food, no source of income, and perhaps I worked in a tavern that now also doesn't have any income because the alcohol ban has been so drastically draconially and erroneously placed on us that our business has no means of surviving. Perhaps I could have, done something at the local Chisanyama, but now I can't because alcohol sales have been banned. Perhaps I could have done that, and perhaps I could have done that. But the Ramaphosa strangle of the economy, especially at a small business level, is one that makes him out of touch with this country, and there's nothing he can say to solve the problem. Last night in his speech, when he spoke about rescuing of businesses and infrastructure, it was telling to me that he spoke largely and almost exclusively only of large businesses, listed corporations that fall into a massive value chain, but did not speak about the small businesses, really, did not pay focus on the impact this has on the small businesses. That tells you where his priorities lie, and that tells you where his imagination lies. Ramaphosa has run out of ideas. Yes. Those around him don't have any ideas on how to quell this moment either. At best, we just have to police this as best as we can and hope that it settles down organically over the next couple of days.
Oliver Dickson, I seem to hear you saying, or echoing the sentiments of many that saying there's a vacuum of leadership in the country. Thank you very much for speaking to us, for your analysis as well.